What's up? How you doing? I just wanted to say before we get started, when you get done watching the video, check the description for a link to a video addendum where Bruce has a few more words to say about some of the cool things that are happening in the integral community. All right, and without any further ado, enjoy my interview with Bruce Alderman. Hey, what's up, Facebook? How you doing today? How you doing, my beautiful people in the I Am Friends and Fans Facebook group? So today we're going to be live with Bruce Alderman, if we can figure out how to get him on here. There he is. Hey, Bruce, how you doing, bud?
Good. How about you? Sorry for the little delay there. My first time using Facebook Live.
That's all right. Well, welcome to the Facebook Live experience.
I don't have a selfie stick, so my arm might be tired sticking straight out here after a little while.
Well, maybe you can find something to prop it up on or something.
I'll figure it out.
Bruce, let me ask you this. For people who might not know you or might not be familiar with what you do, would you be able to put in a nutshell for us real quick? Who is Bruce Alderman and what kind of things does he do?
In integral circles, I'm known for running a couple forums. I have a daytime job, but in the evenings I teach transpersonal psychology and integral-related classes for a graduate program at a university, and probably am teaching about 6 or 7 courses for that university right now, most of them on transpersonal or integral themes. And I've been writing for a little while in the integral world. Just now have some publications coming out. Been a long time, been a long haul, but finally getting some stuff out there.
That is awesome. We are truly blessed to be able to have somebody with your kind of history be here with us today and talk about this stuff. I wish I had like 50 hours to pick your brain of all the stuff that you're probably teaching in those classes.
Yeah, it's really a privilege. I have opportunities that I could be pursuing elsewhere for maybe a little bit more lucrative return, but I really love the culture and the ability to interact with students around this kind of content and really open up minds and new vision and hearts. And I just love that kind of engagement. So it's a good trade-off.
I can really relate to that. Somebody a couple days ago was saying something to me like, "Oh, David, you're just doing this for the money. If you're doing anything integral, it's probably not for the money."
No.
So we appreciate the fact that you're willing to do this work and to make the sacrifices for this stuff. I mean, I'm sure you're passionate about it, but it's also great that there are people even to do this stuff. There really aren't that many people teaching these kinds of things, are there?
Not that many. And it seems to be even shrinking a little bit from what I can see. Some of the programs are closing and it's hard to sustain, I think. But at least in my university, they're pushing now much more to an online format. It's actually really growing. It was really struggling with the in-person, and I loved the in-person encounters and work with students, but it's online where it's going to thrive now.
That makes sense. It really does. So I thought that the Integral Institute at JFK stuff is closed down. I want to get into your history and kind of start at the beginning a little bit, but while we're still on this topic, you said it's shrinking and stuff. So is the Integral Institute stuff at JFK still going? And do you know of other places and why it's shrinking or what's going on?
The stuff that was directly connected with Integral Institute is gone. That was the Integral Theory program with Sean Hargens, Esbjorn Hargens, and that one closed down some years ago. There was an Integral Psychology program under Vernice Solimar, and I actually graduated from that program and taught in that program for a few years, but that also closed down. But we still have the Consciousness and Transformative Studies program and Transpersonal Counseling Psychology and Holistic Psychology, and we still teach integral content in all of those programs. So yeah, the online is really what's keeping the ones that are not aimed at a practical therapeutic application, that are more theoretical or consciousness oriented. Those were not bringing in enough people to sustain on the ground, but they're actually bringing in quite a few people now, at least for JFK standards, online. So that's exciting.
That's interesting. Do you think that there's not that much passion around the theoretical stuff, that there's more just like energy and passion behind some of these other topics? Is that what's going on with that?
I think partly it's that, and partly it's just the economy.
It's the economy, stupid.
We definitely used to get a lot more people when people were a little bit more flush with money to spend on a degree that actually for many has felt more to be a process oriented, for their own self-development, their own personal process and growth, with hopeful application in writing or coaching or something like that.
Right.
Our programs consist probably of, I would say, 90 to 95% women. And,
awesome.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interest there, but they mostly are interested in embodied work and on the ground work, how they can be helping people, how they can build something practical. So they're much more focused on the counseling and therapeutic work in different ways and educational oriented things rather than just dwelling in consciousness development or theory, that kind of thing.
Well, I hope some of these ladies can work on some of that and actually get involved in our community, because we could certainly use some more female embodiment and their perspective in our spaces. That's for sure.
For sure. Yeah, there are a few who are lurking in my forums who are former students, but they don't announce themselves.
So let's dive into the history a little bit. How did you come across integral ideas in the first place?
I probably came across them initially when I was in my early 20s, probably. And at that time, I was really interested in Krishnamurti and Krishnamurti's teachings. And when I saw Ken Wilber's books, I actually hated them. I saw all these diagrams and graphs in there, and I thought there's no way you can graph spirit. And he's just off on a head trip. And I couldn't relate to it at all. Not at all, but it didn't catch my interest at that time.
Right.
And different things happened. I ended up actually moving out to Arizona, and I lived on the land. I lived out in the forest for a few months and then eventually got work and started working, but I stayed a lot outdoors, and I did a lot of contemplation and hiking in the canyons out there. And from there, I was really beginning to develop a meditative discipline then. And I got an invitation to go to Asia and teach English. Just out of the blue, I was called by a friend who'd been over there working, and he thought of my name, and they called me and invited me out of the blue. So I went to Korea, and I ended up spending 4.5 years or so over in Asia. And first couple of years were in Korea, and I visited a lot of monasteries and did my teaching work over there. But then when I left, I had a lot of money in my pocket, and I didn't really have any plans. I had dropped out of college to go over there, and I wasn't really interested in going back to pursue college yet. So I took off to Indonesia and found an ashram to live in, and I studied music, and I basically practiced meditation every day there. You didn't have to pay to stay that place. It was called Shanti Loka, but you had to agree to attend meditation every night. So I said, that's a deal. Yeah, so that was a great experience. I did a lot of practice there. I had some opportunities to go over to Malaysia and Thailand and do more extensive silent retreats there. And a number of people kept telling me, you need to get out of Indonesia or even Southeast Asia. If you're interested in music and you're interested in meditation, you need to go to India. And I actually had a couple, for me, pretty powerful experiences there, kind of presaging some kind of change in direction, just mystical kinds of experiences or dream type visionary experiences. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to follow it. And I went and ended up living in India for another year. And I worked at Krishnamurti school there and did a lot of my own, again, inquiry and practice. And yeah, so all of that experience, I don't really need to go over all those details, but all that experience in those different places practicing. I went off to Nepal and was at a Dzogchen monastery there and was studying there, and I really loved the teacher. And I told the teacher I'd like to stay here. I'm done with my time in India. I'd like to stay here. And he asked me to wrap it up, whatever my karma was in the United States. He said, do you have any college that's like pending? And I said, I do. He said, go back and finish it. Your parents will never forgive me if you stay here and never finish your Western degree track. Then you can come back. And I felt disappointed by that, but I decided I'm going to do it. And I went back to return to college. And interestingly, within probably 3 weeks of being back in Texas, I saw a flyer on the wall for a dream yoga retreat. And I went to it, and it turned out it was taught by the man who was raised by the guy in Kathmandu who sent me back home for college. So it just happened that his son basically was in the city that I went to without any knowledge of that. And so I ended up studying with him for a while and actually ended up living at his house in Virginia after some time.
Crazy.
Yeah. So
small
a lot
world.
of things. Yeah, small world. So all of that just to say that experience after I came back to the United States, and I really felt like I want to find a way to apply this to Western knowledge, Western ways of living, to integrate the worlds. And at that point, I discovered Ken Wilber book again. And this time it really made sense to me. I had pushed pretty far at the Krishnamurti school to kind of let go of mythical thinking, of mythology, of story, and just do like bare awareness to thought and all of that. And I found out I started to starve for those things. I learned how to gain a certain kind of penetration into consciousness doing that, and it led to some wonderful experiences. But overall, in terms of my own human being, my own human heart, I didn't really like being divorced from all those dimensions of human expression. And also, there was a kind of anti-intellectualism there too, and that also wasn't comfortable for me. So I really decided I wanted to bring all of those things together: art and passion, contemplation, intellect, philosophy. So that's what really got me into studying Ken Wilber, and found that he really pulled a lot of those threads together for me.
That's kind of an interesting case, because as integralists, we probably often encounter people who might seem sympathetic, but maybe they're not quite ready for it. And maybe the worry is that you will show it to them too soon, and then they'll be turned off to it and they'll never be into it or something like that. But that's kind of cool that you came back around to it, and then you were able to
finally be into it.
Yeah, it just, I think developmentally or life circumstances or whatever, it just didn't fit the first time through.
Right. That's interesting. So, okay. So then you came across some Wilbur work. How long did it take you to get like plugged into the integral community? What's that like?
I eventually decided I wanted to do something further, not just reading books. And I started looking around for schools and how I could go on to grad school and do something more. And I used to be in a rock band a long time ago. And I remember our sound engineer mentioning that there was a woo-woo college on the West Coast. And I thought, what was that woo-woo college? John? Yeah. And I thought of the name of it. And it was John F. Kennedy University. And I looked it up. And they had a really good transpersonal psychology program there. And I thought that's as close as I can probably get to bringing some of these things together. Ken Wilber being one of the influential transpersonalists back in the day. And so I applied and was accepted to the program. And while I was a student, I was invited with a group of students in our cohort to go to Ken Wilber's house for a weekend and hang out with him and receive teachings from him. And so I did that and spent the weekend at the loft there and got to talk with him and ask questions. And at the time, it was announced that they were about to start this big web presence. They were just about to launch Integral Naked. And so they gave us all heads up on getting signed up early and getting on board with that. And so I did. I signed up right away and got into the forum discussions and watching those early videos. And that just pulled me into the whole community. And I've been now creating forums and doing my own kind of content since then. Yeah.
That's awesome. I really like the ongoing thread of you as a musician too, because I was going to ask you about that. I know you put out that rap for your group.
Y'all like words, I'm about to fling 'em. Ken Wilber's praises, I'm about to sing 'em. Snowflake's hands were about to wring 'em. Let me show you what I got, yeah, it's my lingo. I ain't gonna drive no Elantra. I'm a second-tier master of Tantra. Chillin' with my homies at Earpies. Talking smack and knocking back Slurpees.
And I'm a rapper myself, so I just wanted to recognize you as one MC to another.
Yeah, awesome.
So how long have you been, what kind of styles are you into? Like, what's your main instrument? Tell me about music a little bit.
I was first in a rock band with Billy Bob Thornton's brother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I met him at a hospital. We were both working there. And he said, I used to be in a band and I'd like to get something going again. I said, yeah, let's do it. And he was much better than me. I just started playing the bass guitar and he was a long accomplished musician, but he was willing to take me on and train me. And so we did that. And so we played some music and we got kicked off stage for being too loud and had a little bit of stuff on the radio, but not that much. He actually ended up dying early, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was really a big loss. But he just was a person who burned really intensely and bright. And Billy Bob Thornton has a few of our songs on his album. He took them without asking, but that's okay. But he also has a few songs about his brother on there. Yeah, so I kind of put that behind me for a while. When I went out to Arizona and was living out in the desert Southwest, I picked up an ocarina. I just started noodling on the ocarina out in the canyons.
What's an ocarina?
It's like a little round clay flute.
Okay.
A couple holes in there, and just it was easy to keep in my pocket and, play with the birds and make echoes in the canyons and stuff like that.
Okay, that would be fun.
Yeah, it was a little hobby thing. But once I got to Asia, I just started thinking I want to just learn more flute. So basically in Korea, I studied traditional Korean drumming and Korean flute. Indonesia, I studied gamelan and I studied Indonesian flute. And then India, I studied bansuri or bamboo flute at Banaras Hindu University.
So are you mostly wind instruments, flutes, and bass? Or what other kind of instruments do you play?
I played the dulcimer for a while.
What's a dulcimer? Which one's that?
Appalachian dulcimer. It's like a slide guitar, kind of. You keep it sitting in your lap and you play with it.
Right. Okay. And then it's all right.
So
cool, man. So you learned a lot of non-conventional kind of instruments while you were traveling around?
Exactly. Yeah. And since I've been back, I've made a few very amateurish albums, usually just using samples and synthesizers and
That's
flutes
awesome.
and things like that. Yeah.
Where can people check out these albums at?
Blue Su Ling is my name for that.
Did you have like a SoundCloud or something?
I have it on Bandcamp.
Okay. We'll get a link to that in the description at the end. Okay. Don't you worry.
Okay. All right.
I was telling the people who are watching because I know they're concerned. They want to get that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I want to know about your music. Like, when did you get into your music?
I've been doing music for a long time. Like, I think I started more in the visual arts. but I started cutting up clips of my albums and like DJing and getting into like rapping and stuff when I was in like late elementary school, like early middle school. And then when I got more into high school, I kind of like outgrew rap, and a lot of the main themes are, they're more like middle school kid. So then I got more into the like punk rock, ska, rock, indie rock kind of stuff. Was in some bands. I play guitar and bass and drums and some keys. And then as I got a little bit older, like probably around the integral stages, somebody showed me some Saul Williams. Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh,
this is like, where rap can go.
Yeah, it kind of reawakened something in me. And then I sort of found like a bunch of other rap that was at more of an intellectual and intelligent kind of level, saying something. And then it slowly started to make its way onto some of my albums. Like I was even probably doing more like acoustic singer-songwriter stuff with my wife at the time. So I was like on the whole other spectrum over there, like almost doing folk music and stuff. But more and more I started to go back in that direction. And the last few albums I've just been, I definitely consider myself an integral artist. So even though like hip hop is a like major part of what I do feel like I can grab anything from anywhere or do anything I want. I don't feel like boxed in or anything like that. Which is the cool thing that I was impressed about your Earpy Slurpy song is that I was like, what? Bruce Alderman is bold. I was like showing it to my friend and he was like, this guy made that? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, when? He's like, when he was like this age, like he pointed to one of your younger photos. I was like, no, this was like a month ago. You put this out. It's pretty good, man. Like, have you done rap songs before?
No, that was the first time. And I've been riding in the car, taking my son back and forth to school, and sometimes the rap is on the radio, and I just kept thinking, I'm gonna do that sometime. I just want to try that. So I just gave it a try. Somebody was joking about it, of course, that I have absolutely the wrong voice for it. So it just, it makes it kind of funny.
There's a old school hip hop song called The Duke, I believe, where it's like a person writes a rap song, but they do it in the voice of John Wayne.
Oh.
Sure, I rustled some cattle and tended the sheep, but my main concern was rapping to the beat.
So, there's that kind of voice in hip hop too, somewhere if you dig deep enough. I thought you did a pretty good job, actually, man. I was pretty impressed by it.
My flow broke a little bit, but I'll work on it. I'll get a better flow next time. So
I thought it was nicely delivered.
What's that, Old Town Road? That one's getting some play. I know it's a country voice.
Yeah. Hip hop and country, they both write music about what they think is cool in their group. It's like my tractor, my boots, my truck, or my, and then over here it's like, rolling in my 6-4. But they're very similar. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the integral community and where we're at now. What would your assessment be of what we currently have going on? Like, where do we find ourselves? What are the pros and cons?
It feels to me that we're in a period of redefining.
I like that.
I feel like some threads have, and some momentum has kind of been lost. Some threads have come undone. Popular phrase that I think Tom Murray started using, that Bonita Roy and me and other people picked up, is the integral diaspora, which is that, people all were immediately circling around integral theory and following very closely, and now kind of branching off and a little bit doing their own thing, but undeniably influenced by that and still wanting in some ways to carry it forward. And so I think there's this whole diasporic movement that's out there, and there's this core that's still there. And I think Corey is doing some good work with the Ken Wilber show, that he's bringing new content to us through that. And I think there are good things happening, but just feeling out what's going on in my forums, what's going on when I interface across Facebook and other integral communities, I do feel there's kind of a searching around right now, and in some ways a reaching for social relevance. There's a lot confronting us. For instance, watching the traction that Jordan Peterson has gotten by taking up some social issues and addressing them, and just generated enormous attention. Of course, not all of it good and some of it controversial, but in this day and age, it doesn't really matter in the sense that attention is attention, and it actually builds some momentum and gives some gravity. And I feel like there's a kind of an envy almost going on in certain integral circles. Like, how did we miss that boat? How are we not voicing our own vision in a clear and straight enough way that it's actually landing culturally? And can we begin to do that? Can we begin to actually become, more significant players instead of sideline categorical analyzers in a sense?
Right. There's a longing to get involved and to get engaged and for integral to be relevant in the world and to actually be cashing in on some of the promise of all of these big ideas and skillful distinctions. Like, can we really make a difference? I like that. It's a really good way to frame it. That really does seem to be a pretty good perspective on what's going on. It seems to me that there are some major areas of reoccurring disagreement that happen within our community. And maybe if we could figure out some way to address and solve some of these issues, or at least to be able to start to hash them out more within our community, that maybe we could make some progress and move forward on that. What do you think?
I created, and foolishly, maybe in a gambling kind of way, but I created the Integral Stage group for that purpose a month ago. And we've had one panel discussion so far. I'm recording another one on Monday of this coming week, and I've approached a number of people. But basically what we want to do on the Integral Stage is for people who produce content, consumable integral content, whether it's lectures or performances or discussions or whatever, to have a place to share it, but also to bring voices and important representatives of different movements and different thought lines within the integral community together and into dialogue to hash out some of the ideas around that Frank Visser often raises, for instance, around evolution and how seriously integral takes science, or some of the social issues, the hot social issues that are present right now, political questions, metaphysical questions in terms of panpsychism or materialism. Or, there's all kinds of different fault lines that are there, and they don't have to be seen as fault lines. There are different ways that the community is organizing itself, and I think there are fruitful contacts that still can be made across those boundaries, that maybe new insights can be generated by exploring those tensions. And so I'd like the Integral Stage to be one vehicle for that, a place where we can organize regular debates and dialogues and have it out about some of these issues and really try to get clear, have some pretty strong guidelines for how a debate should be handled, and be pretty rigorous about it. If we really can, just really go for it and really step up our game. Don't just post forum posts, but really like bring what you have and let's really try to move the needle a little bit on our understanding.
Well, that's what's up, Bruce. For me, I feel like we're supposed to be, as integralists, the best at processing tensions and really making skillful progress and rescuing the baby from the dirty bathwater and being able to take an honest, good, hard look. And so far, I'm not really seeing it, but I definitely want to see more. And I'm glad that we have leaders like you. I mean, let me not say that I'm not seeing it completely, because I mean, definitely in a lot of these groups, there are certain people, they're wise and they're sharing their wisdom and they have insightful, intelligent things to say. And then most people, I would say, have some at least limited capacity for that at their best moments. But also, I find myself continually disappointed in some of the stuff I see coming from our community. Like I think in some cases that I've been in other communities like the Sam Harris groups or like the Joseph Campbell groups, and they seem to be more civil and skillful than us sometimes. And that's disappointing to me.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that's true. I would expect a high level of ability to dialogue across boundaries within an integral community. And I do see it taking place, but not consistently. And there definitely are same kind of issues that you see almost in many communities where there's like the flame wars, and communication breaks down and people end up blocking each other and not talking to each other. And, so that still happens, fairly frequently in the integral community that I can see. And to me, that's disappointing. Heroes for me have been Raimon Panikar and Thomas Merton and some other people in the past who are all, I would say masters of intercultural and cross-paradigmatic communication and dialoguing. And I think that's really a skill that integral needs. It's not that well cultivated. And I hope more can be done to exercise, to flex that muscle.
Bruce, maybe that would be a good talk that we could do next time or in the future, something about like what would an integral version of skillful communication or debate look like, some of the ways that it's been going wrong and some of the ways that we think we could maybe correct some of this stuff or do it better, or like maybe just brainstorming about some ideas about how we could practically set things up to be able to make some of that happen. Just an idea.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important and definitely interested in that. I've been talking to, a number of people relatively recently about what makes forum spaces work. How do you build a generative enclosure, the kind of language that I like to use for that, and what makes a space degenerate. We need to look at that at the level of culture and at the level of groups and get a handle on that. So yeah, I'm definitely interested in exploring that. And yeah, a few things are on my mind, but I might hold on mentioning those until we actually get into that dialogue.
Okay. Well, before we move on from this subject of Earpies and where we're at with this group now, is there more that we could potentially say about some of the integral shadow issues that we're seeing? What do those kind of general themes look like, would you say?
I don't know. I mean, there's shadow that shows up in so many different ways, right? We're human beings and we have shadows. And
fair enough.
It manifests differently in different groups. I've definitely experienced some pretty toxic encounters in multiple integral forums over the years. And that's always been a point of concern for me because I usually don't engage in that kind of hostile kind of discourse myself for the most part. And I've seen it on the official integral forums and privately created forums. So it's been prevalent. I think there are different ways to approach it. Some are to create fairly structured spaces with very, very clear rules. And I've had disagreements with other people who monitored, for instance, my integral post-metaphysical spirituality forum. And I don't know, my own take on things for the most part is I want to set up a space that encourages meaningful dialogue and exchange and avoids unnecessary hostility and that sort of thing. At the same time, I don't want to play too much of a parental role. And I'm assuming that people in an integral space are adults and that when tensions arise, we can work them out intersubjectively rather than taking a top-down approach. So I was just mentioning I've had some disagreements or some criticism from people on the outside saying I need to be taking more of a top-down approach about some issues. And I think that's fair to say. It's a fair suggestion, and it's always, I sometimes do it and I sometimes don't.
Yeah. Well, maybe it depends on the group too. It's like if you're talking about having rigorous standards on this integral stage for how the debate gets handled or something, that's one place. But then maybe more in like the Earpy space, it's kind of just like no holes barred, a little bit of a show.
It is. Yeah, it is. And Earpies, since you've mentioned it a number of times, Earpies was an experiment which actually was fully expected to fail within a few weeks or a month. And it was started as a joke and expected just to crash and burn. And one person just suggested, he didn't even suggest to me, he just made a throwaway comment in the middle of a big conflict on another forum that was going on that was not being moderated and things were getting very messy. But people were calling out for moderation and the person just made a comment, why don't we make a space that's deliberately not moderated and just see what happens? Part of the tension was people expecting something to be done and it wasn't being done. And they were there's a lot of tension just around that. So,
right. So when you know that nothing's going to happen, then you'll stop asking for it and then we'll see what happens.
Exactly. And so that was the idea. The expectation was we're a bunch of people with our own issues and our own shadows and stuff. And, a group running that way is going to just crash and burn. And
see, that was not the idea that I had from the outside of what the group was. But that's interesting to know that that's how it came to be. Like for those of you who don't know, when we mention Earpy, this reference goes back to a note that Ken Wilber wrote some years back, and he was addressing his critics. And let me put this in the most charitable way possible. Some people feel as though he was dismissing his more skillful and detailed critics and spending more time kind of dismissing the more pain in the ass critics or whatever. Mm-hmm. And in this episode, let me try to put this in context. He was talking about a person who was giving him crap for saying the word simply too much, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to that person, he said, if you're going to nitpick stuff like that, then you can simply suck my dick. Right. And then this kind of set off a bunch of people in the community. And part of the problem was embedded in that. Some people are like, that's just not skillful, especially in the context of the feeling dismissed as critics anyways. So this episode in Integral History is kind of notorious, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of mixed feelings around it already as it is. So how did that get associated with this group? Also, maybe I should say, I kind of thought this group was more of like a funny meme sharing kind of group, like a place to joke around more than it was like a let's for real hash it out kind of a thing. But
yeah, it's really interesting. It didn't start with a lot of planning. It started with a couple things that popped in my head that I made it as a visual joke for the person who made this comment that we should make a forum that's going to just crash and burn. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to just design the worst possible thing and the most laughable kind of thing. And
okay.
just as a visual joke, I didn't even think anyone would join it. And so
it's amazing how these things sort of take off,
take their own life, So
yeah.
I remember the Earp, incident, and I think I mentioned to you on a comment today, but I'll say it as part of our narrative or story here. Years ago, when I went with the student group to Ken Wilber's house, and we spent that time with him, he had just gotten finished having a workshop with David Data, and it was a sensuality and sexuality workshop. So he was still all kind of worked up, and he would make a lot of really racy jokes to us and pantomime doing things with a tonka and all kinds of things, So
yeah.
he's joking around and we all laughed. I laughed too. And it was humorous. But at the same time, I kept thinking, I've just witnessed all kinds of like gurus and stuff crash and burn and go down in flames around impropriety, and does Wilber really want to flirt with this in today's culture? It's not that I thought that what he was doing was really wrong, but I thought
right.
It's not going to fly, especially if he's reaching out to universities and trying to attract students, the admins are not going to really probably go with it if they hear too much about what's going on. So that was a concern for my part. And I wrote about it on Integral Naked. And one of the people who wrote a book critical of Wilber, I think it was the Bald Ambition book, quoted me about that incident. I got a little bit ashamed of that because I didn't want to really call out Wilber or anything bad. I just was concerned for the overall movement. Yes, it was funny, but do you really want to go there? Right?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my background there. And then I remember the Wyatt Earp incident, which again, humorous language and everything, but I thought, I understand his frustration. A lot of people have dogpiled on him and been really unfair with him. Anybody would blow a fuse over that. That's really nasty. Some of the stuff that people have done trying to just tear him down. Anybody would feel eventually fed up and want to just yell back. And at the same time, I thought professionally is probably not the smart thing to do. It's not going to help him in some circles that are unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, just more formal. So there was always that concern there. I had that concern. It wasn't from a green place and he didn't drive me away, but
sure.
It was from a place that I was like, oh, that's a little risky. That's a little dangerous, So
yeah.
Now here I am playing exactly that game. And so I think, that's pretty interesting. Probably there's some psychological stuff there to look at. As a psychologist, I can probably dig into that. But my idea really was, as the group was starting, I remembered the Earp incident. And I had seen this animation a short while ago called Wanted Melody, which was basically all these cowboy penises, running around in the Wild West, shooting each other and chasing after a lovely lady who's a singer. And it's a French cartoon that came out, and it was a lot of just absurd imagery. And so I thought that this Wild West penis thing is just so perfect to merge with Wilber's Earp incident. So I just put his face on it and made that the banner of the group, just as part of the visual joke. But
perfect, man. It was hilarious.
It just took off. And so it became its own thing, and it started developing its own culture. And yeah.
Yeah, now it's a meme.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to go back and retouch this, and I would put myself in this group, I think that there are a lot of people who were upset about the Earpy thing, not because of the suck my dick thing, but because they were upset that he spent more of time dismissing the bad critics than actually dealing with the good critics. Like, he could have quickly dismissed the bad critics and then gone into dealing with all of the criticisms of his good critics that he's been kind of sweeping under the rug. And that's why we have Integral World and Frank Visser and all that stuff, is because of the fact that he hasn't really addressed a lot of this stuff. And it's been some years, right?
Right. Yeah. There have been some critics off and on over the years that he's engaged with, and sometimes in some mighty fiery polemics, and other times where, it feels like more engagement, more direct dialogue, more wrestling over these ideas really would have been wonderful and welcome. And I really would have liked to have seen more of that myself.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely a disappointing part of that is, there were some serious criticisms out there that were worth engaging, that, that I felt were worth engaging, that were not being taken up also. And as I mentioned to you, at this point now, I'm no longer looking for him to do that. And my thought is, any of us who still take this seriously and who want to do something with it, we've got to wrestle with what those criticisms are, both criticisms that are arising within the community and from outside of it, and begin to address it in ways that I think do justice to fair perspectives and do not prematurely dismiss a perspective as coming from a lower meme and therefore not landing with any weight. I think legitimate criticisms can be made from multiple centers of gravity, multiple stages of development.
That's a very good and important point. Thank you for making that point.
Yeah. So I think that's important. It's like, to me, it undercuts integrity within integral community to use the developmental assessment thing too readily as a defense.
Right, as a way to disqualify critics or whatever. Yeah,
it's self-insulating.
Super unskillful.
It makes it look cultish and everything, so it just doesn't help.
Right, and like you said, if it's something about science or whatever, even if the person is at a general orange altitude, they're totally qualified to make criticisms within their field. That's totally makes sense.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, well, that's really good stuff. This kind of gets us into the projecting into the future bit. So I think there might be, even if we know that Wilbur isn't going to debate any of his critics, I think there still might be a useful thing of continuing to ask that he does, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Or to point out that he won't.
You know, I was a little bit surprised, but pleased that he took up the dialogue, not an actual dialogue, but took up at least an engagement with the ideas of Peterson. And people disagree over his assessment, but I'm glad at least he entered those waters, you know, and started addressing something that was really so active in the culture and obviously circulating with interest among some integralists as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think partly he's probably held back because of his health issues and other things. It looks like he's got new energy and some new passion, and I'm excited to see what he still could work with. I'd love it if he and Mark Edwards did a dialogue, for instance, or some of the other people who've really brought some innovative thinking and some fair critique. I know he's done written dialogue with Edwards and some others, but it'd be nice to see a live exchange for sure.
Yeah, I think as long as he's around, we should still put some pressure on him to do some stuff. But I wouldn't bank on it. But so maybe we're going to try to get some debates going from some more people in the community. I started a Reddit page. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like after I did my Davidian versus Wilberian integral map thing, I invited people to also submit their ideas for updates and criticisms and things like that. And so there's an update AQAL on Reddit for people who are interested. And eventually, I mean, this is obviously very early days, but I would like for us to think about coming up with some kind of an actual official process with an integral community of the adequate to be able to actively upgrade and refine the map together through some kind of process, through exploring these ideas and coming to real conclusions. And I think we could take things like some of our integral governance methods and we could figure out what's going on with some of these things and we could come to real decisions at the end of the day. I think we could even have debates in a different kind of way where at the end of the day, it's not just like, well, what do you think? Who won? It's like we could state the premises of the arguments that we put on the table. Those things could be fleshed out. And if I defeat your premises, then you don't get that argument. You know what I mean? And so we could, even if that doesn't prove that a person is right, it would say this person defeated this person's arguments. You know what I mean? Only this argument was left standing. We would actually be able to have a more realistic idea about what's going on with some of that stuff and potentially make progress on it. I would like to see a lot more official kind of process where we come together and take like this Western Enlightenment project style approach to refine the map together. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think we need to use and marshal our collective intelligence and our collective resources. And I think media and other things provide us some tools to be able to collaborate and think together to create co-intelligence instead of co-stupidity.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely. I support that. And I think there are a lot of ways we can do it. One of the visions for the integral stage is definitely to take topics that are contentious and really work through them in a careful way. And one idea is actually just a steelman debate, which is a perspective taking exercise. And these debates would be, you have to entirely argue your opponent's position and they have to entirely argue yours and try to beat each other. So, you know, often steelmanning is used as just part of an overall debate process. And I think it needs to be, but I think it could be an event in itself for people who are strong proponents on one side to actually really powerfully try to argue the strengths of the others as much as they can.
That kind of reminds me of this idea, like, you know how they have rap battles? Have you ever seen a compliment battle?
No. Yeah.
You animal, savage, you legend! I am gracious to be in your presence. I will bottle your and your blood and your pee just to capture your essence. The way I feel about him, man, it's all an obsession. He really could have killed me. But instead, he taught me a lesson. He flipped the script, and instead he put me on in the session. So just to show my gratitude, I got you a present. Time, baby, let's go. That's a present for me, baby.
It would be something like that. I think the hard part about a Steelman argument, though, is that, let me first say, I think there are topics in which you can find a middle position and both people can be right. Like, for example, I think, you know, in integral circles, you have some people who are more on the socialist kind of communal kind of themes, and then more people who are on the individualist themes. And then also you have people who are integralists who tend to nest the one inside the other, right? So it's like you have inside of the more translation, like, let's keep the liberal themes and just be more responsible. And then you have people who are more interested in the communal themes, and they're like, we're going to have communal themes, but it's going to be collective individualism.
Right.
And I think they both work in like a long-term and short-term kind of projection potentially. So they could both be true. But then you have things like this idealism versus, I don't like to say materialism because that too often gets strawmanned with like empirical reductionism. And if you're an integralist and you take into account all four quadrants, you're probably more of an emergentist than a simplistic reductionist empiricist. So this more emergentist versus idealistic perspective, like somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Like at least when it comes down to like how reality actually works in an absolute sense in terms of cosmology and ontology, there is a right and wrong answer to that question. You know what I mean?
There is, but it also could be that both people are wrong. And
okay. I suppose that's right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a hard agnostic, so I'm good with that.
Yeah. I'm not trying to go in the direction of a wishy-washiness there, but just to acknowledge that both could be wrong and to step as far as you can to the other territory. For my idea with the Steelman thing, it would not be to abandon your own perspective or your own ultimate convictions, but to see how far you can stretch to take that other in. And in the end, you may have made some really strong points that ultimately you don't believe, but you just go in with, you know, the full strength of it that you can, which I think at least can create an opportunity for understanding each other across the boundaries, even if ultimately you come out of it, which I still think you should, with convictions intact or new convictions established based on sound reasoning. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my concern is like, how do you help the person to not strawman you while they think they're steelmanning you?
Right. That's the challenge. Yeah, and that's why I think it's good, is because so often when we are debating, we strawman the one and then you present your counter argument.
Right.
And so
would they be able to help each other out?
Yes. In fact,
so that's part of it.
Yeah, part of it is basically they have to make it in a way that the other person finds convincing that you actually represented well.
Okay. So there's some back and forth during the rounds where you have to verify with the other person.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Otherwise, I'm like, how do they? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I get that.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, just one exercise idea, but I really would like to have some communally generated vehicles for us to stretch our perspectives and to really apply our thinking and to work with the tensions that are there. And sometimes that they just, over so many years, you just find the same tensions and fault lines that generate in forum after forum.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine that a single event would resolve everything magically, but I think it could move the needle a little bit. You know,
it's nice to at least have some media around that. You know, like earlier when you were saying you're glad to see Ken Wilber get out and talk about the Jordan Peterson thing. Like, I'm a critic of Wilber, but I'm also glad to see him doing that. And I was thankful to have something else to make content about too, you know? So, you know, the way I see it is that we're all talking to people at different parts of the spiral, and more conversation to be able to really flesh out more of that dialogue is helpful, especially at these higher stages where we haven't really gotten into some of these topics and we kind of are just maybe listening to only one person's voice on the subject. I think it's an exciting time, and I like the way that you put it earlier, how it seems like we're kind of trying to redefine and reorganize ourselves. I'm really hoping that on the back end of all of this, we can get our stuff together, we can get organized, and we can have a real integral, revolutionary, transformative movement where we're like getting involved with the culture in some kind of an organized way in both the personal personal daily life interactions that we have with each other, having some kind of a systematized method to an approach to do that, but also on a big scale, some kind of plan about how we can help to transition to a more integral society, which doesn't mean converting everyone to integral, but it means getting organized and having integral governance structures and good integral leadership to be able to better guide humanity, I think.
Yeah, have you paid much attention to what Marilyn Hamilton does with her integral city work?
I think I'm like barely aware of it.
Okay.
What has she got going?
She's got a pretty interesting method for basically governing cities on integral principles.
Awesome.
And she has different ways of monitoring. Basically, she has what she calls mesh workers, people who are skilled at networking hierarchies and then hierarchically organizing existing networks to basically catalyze exchanges across the city and across sectors within the city, bridge silos. She's got different kinds of mapping devices to track what's happening culturally, what's happening economically, what's happening politically, in different areas, and actually organize city responses around shifts in trends within different regions of the city. So just a whole lot of tools that she's developed, and she's actually governing one city in Canada with that.
Oh,
and
wow.
has introduced her model to a number of other cities around the world. And so it's interesting that there definitely is some applied on the ground, useful work being done there, and it could be, a model for some other things.
One of the things I hear from people at Green a lot is this idea of like, it's all too big. It's tough, man. Like, what can I even do about it?
Mm-hmm.
It's like everything's just getting worse and worse and I don't see any progress. And it's like, look, you don't see any progress, but I will tell you, I know people who are like working hard on trying to make things better behind the scenes, and they're coming up with really cool stuff. And you may not know about it yet, but when you do, it's going to really make a difference.
Yeah.
And so don't worry, there are people who are out there working on this stuff. And I'll tell you, man, I know several really smart integralists who are hard at work on these projects. Like, we have a lot of collective wisdom and passion and tools around this stuff. It'll be great when we can really start to come together and figure out ways to build together.
I think so. Did you see that recent video that came out with Jamie Wheel?
I think so.
Author of Stealing Fire. He described his experience of applying the Aqua model and things in the boardrooms and it not working very well for him.
Right.
And so I take his experience seriously and his concern seriously. And from my perspective, it's not to dismiss that, but I think it's an invitation to find out where are the assumptions falling short,
Yep.
where were the misapplications, or where were we possibly running ahead of ourselves, or what was going on there. And so when you were talking about the Reddit group or other efforts where you're really collectively working, I was thinking of the need really to monitor the effectiveness of the applications and be ready to adjust and
to refine and all that.
We brought some of the most comprehensive, fully dimensioned, aqua kosher approaches into businesses, and quite often even had the fully drank the Kool-Aid buy-in of the CEOs/founders. So we had carte blanche in a way that you never do in bigger companies or coming in through HR to do a training. Like, we had massive permission to play, and we did everything from bodily stuff to communication practices to maps and models to theories. I mean, just did it all and destroyed shareholder value. Wasted so much time, ended up blowing out the backs of those engagements a year later, 18 months later, because we were costing a ton of money and taking a ton of time, enforcing that people develop, grow up, take on tools and models that had no clear relevance to their business, their work, or their lives, and no one could handle that much change while still doing their day jobs.
I talked about that a little bit in my last Q&A here in my group, and this is just kind of a rebuttal to that topic and what he said. It sounded like to me like that they got a little bit over enthusiastic and they tried to basically convert a bunch of people to integral and try to get them to like take on all these projects. And I don't think that's a good way to do it. In my experience with integral governance, the little bit of it that I've done, what I've seen is that you don't have to know how to be integral or learn integral at all to be able to use these governance systems. You can just learn how to use the program or use the system, and you just have to get comfortable with the thing itself. Like, for example, holacracy, right? You don't got to be an integralist to use holacracy. You just have to learn how to apply the different methods. So I think that you could decide from the top down, we're going to use integral standards on this. And then the people in the office just go by that governance method. But I agree with your general point that we do need to figure out where we're failing and where we're actually succeeding, and figure out some kind of way of measuring that and figure out what works and what doesn't work and refine and do it better.
Yes. Yeah. For me, what works more is having the integral stuff in the background.
Yeah.
And you don't have to push the language or the charts or anything forward. That can inform your own thinking and just your own general sensibility. I know a former teacher of mine who has left JFK and is now working as a consultant with corporations and also helping sex trafficked girls and things like that. She's doing a lot of really good work, but she's doing it all on an integral basis without leading with integral in the front. But her capacity to hold multiple perspectives and to come from her embodied wisdom from living with that for so long, it's really effective and powerful. And she's been telling to me some of her experiences in the boardroom that are pretty impressive and powerful when she's able to guide people through processes of awareness and recognizing blind spots and all these things, which integral framing is allowing her to do, but it's never upfront or part of the language. Yeah.
It's like implicit, not explicit. It's more for you as a user to be able to see those things and be aware of them I definitely still think that that's kind of like a first tier impulse that we're seeing is like, oh, let's convert everybody to integral. I think part of what's good about being integral is that when you really have a transpersonal perspective, you can kind of get over yourself and just be authentic for the situation, be what's needed for the context. And that in itself allows you to really meet people. I mean, you're you're an integral transpersonal psychologist. You know this. Hey.
Yeah, no, but you're putting it well. I wanted to say something, but you go ahead, ask your question first. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that when I was in Burlington, Vermont, I was living out there for a minute, and there was a place called Burlington College out there that offered a course in integral transpersonal psychology. And I was trying really hard to get up the money to be able to take that course. I never got to, but that was probably the closest I ever got to being able to go to college.
Cool.
Definitely had the interest in it.
I didn't even know that was out there. That's cool to know.
It's not anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like so many of them, they go away, Yeah. I was just going to say, talking about just the integral's role in society. Sometimes I jokingly, but it's only half jokingly, use a metaphor of the parasite. That integral is kind of like a parasite, and it basically needs a host to hook onto in order to live. So it's not its own thing.
Right.
It needs to hook onto an organization or a community, and then it can actually affect changes within that system by attaching itself to it,
Because it's like an operating system. So it's like you could run that operating system within a group, but then not everybody necessarily needs to understand integral to be able to use it.
Right. And I think also holding integral a little bit humbly in that we don't try to reify it too much. And instead we take more seriously the communities and the groups that we engage with and what's living and what's on the ground there, and then allow that docking to happen, but to recognize that nothing will be happening here without this host where the real life is, and that's where the real concern needs to be.
Right.
I think, it's a little bit dicey metaphor because parasites can be destructive. You don't want that. But I also think about the Christian metaphors of salt and light, where the idea is to be salt and light in the culture, yeast in the culture. You're kind of invisible. You interface with the culture and you act in it. Salt is often invisible, but it brings the flavor. It brings the richness out. It brings the potential out, and light only presents things by absenting itself, by making itself invisible. It makes other things visible. And anyway, I just like playing with those metaphors.
Those are nice metaphors, man. I like that a lot. I've been thinking about this a lot because someone was asking me about integral communication and my methods for engaging with different people at different stages and what's that's like. So I've been drawing some graphs and thinking about that a little bit. And yeah, definitely. I think this is really touching on something that it matters to a lot of people because it's about how we engage in our everyday life. It can start to get at some really practical answers about what it is to be integral in the world. And honestly, we need that stuff fleshed out a little bit more. There's so much pie in the sky type stuff. And then, we try to qualify a lot of the stuff when we teach spiral dynamics. Don't reduce a person to a stage. That's violent. Those kinds of things. Don't try to teach integral to people like it's the one true way. But at the same time, I don't think we really give good guidance as to what it means to be able to assess where a person is at and engage with them in a skillful way where we get out of our own way and really meet them. So it'd be great to talk about that some more with you too, because some of this stuff is probably stuff that you thought a lot about as well.
In my classes at JFK, as you might expect, there's often resistance to the developmental lens thing. A lot of students are uncomfortable with it. When we do classes on human development, then they kind of get it. Oh, I see. But on the other hand, there is, I think, an understandable concern about pigeonholing people and playing rank on them and disempower others or provide an excuse to neglect others. So I think those are all legitimate concerns. But what I've found has been really useful way of presenting these lenses, which I'm just mentioning because I'm basically piggybacking on something you said. But what I found is very useful is to present the lenses as basically ways that enable us to better meet the other. When we can really understand what are the dynamics of the different stages and the different ways of making meaning and organizing the world. Yes, you could use it in a power over dominator hierarchy way, but it definitely doesn't have to be used that way. And in fact, it's very empowering to basically enable you to, I think, better meet the other, better communicate with the other, better actually catalyze changes for the other.
Yeah, find out what their ranges are. Like when we get up to about here, we start running into some issues. They have all this good stuff going on in here that I can appeal to as axioms to maybe help them grow. I see that they have this one really good, strong line here and they're doing well with that. Maybe we can engage with that to help them grow. Like I think that's a really beautiful metaphor. It's like that these tools can really help us to better see the other person, which better helps us to be able to help them and love them and engage with them and meet them and be a vehicle of service. I was thinking about this too. It's like to be an integral practitioner is to bring the best of so many traditions to the table. It's like you want to bring the state training practices of Buddhism and the service practices of Christianity, the becoming and creating practices of paganism. You want to bring philosophy online. You want to bring your psychology stuff online. And there's a lot of stuff just from doing philosophy, things that you have to learn what it is to be a philosopher that like a lot of people take for granted, like about being willing to kind of hold things in a skeptical way, being willing to question things. So, I mean, like there's a lot of like virtues from each of these traditions that kind of come together into this integral spiral wizard thing. And I really think that if we're missing certain ingredients from these particular traditions, it kind of limits us from really being able to be that powerful servant wizard in action. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think there is so much available to us now. It's hard for any one of us to hold all of those things with equal competence and adequacy. I'm talking about us working together, developing co-intelligence. If we build strong enough community foundations and means of communication, we don't all have to hold all of those things equally and masterfully. Though I think all of us probably, if we're interested in integral, we probably all want to have, as much of those things alive in us as we can.
I definitely don't claim to hold them all equally or, So, but I think that's a good point too. Like Kin tries to make that point as well. It's like, just because we're integral doesn't mean that we're like masters at every line or whatever like that. And, I do think that the cognitive line tends to run ahead. It's like, something and then you slowly realize something and then you slowly learn how to act like that's the case.
Right.
But like a person might be orange cognitively and like still acting out blue and then most of the time still hanging out at red. In terms of their actions. I think if you're in an integral world space, like what I hear from a lot of people is like, the more humble ones especially, is they're like, I don't even really feel like I'm integral. I still have all this work to do down the spiral. I'm like, yeah, that's what an integralist would say. Good for you.
Exactly right.
Keep doing that work down the spiral. I mean, that's what it is to meet somebody too like that. Is like, you're confronted now with this bit of your shadow. Can you love them? Can you get out of your way and meet them? Or are you going to be caught with all these blocks that get in the way of you being actually able to help them?
Right.
And so good stuff, man. I really like this as a note to close up on too, is like this idea of the possibilities of integral into the future and the skillfulness of practitioners to be able to potentially help each other and help grow the world. I do think that we have this potential, and I think it's going to be a damn shame if we don't figure out how to realize it.
Yeah.
If integral felt like the cutting edge of the conversation in sort of 90s, 2000s, where is that cutting edge right now, do you think?
The thing that I'm trying to track the most right now, and I think it's essential for our collective future and the least developed, is what is the emergence of transpersonal, collective, emergent culture? So specifically, what happens when we get together and basically connect in serial, almost like a bunch of computers, to create a collective supercomputer that is non-hierarchical. There's not one person at the top of that pyramid. And that's not flattening. That's not to say we're all going to get into endless process and share our feelings. It's dynamic, subordinate subordination. It is a high-functioning collaborative process.
Yeah, I agree. I'm hoping efforts like yours and other people keep the flame alive, because I feel like it has flickered a little bit in recent years. But I think there is new energy, and I'm excited by it from Ken himself, but also just in the movement that I'm feeling. People are feeling in some new directions, and we've got to be ready to do some sailing.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to say this a little bit earlier. Some people think because I'm a critic of Ken Wilber that like I think I'm like the next Ken Wilber. I think like one of the differences between me and Ken Wilber, going back to this idea of us figuring out how to bring this project online and build it together, is I don't want to be the leader. I see myself as a leader in this community, and I want to invite other people to step up and be leaders together too. Let's come together and take this thing to the next stage. So if I'm about anything, it's about this Integral 2.0, and it's about us doing it together. And I see that that's what you're about too. And you're trying to create this kind of a platform, this, debate space for us to be able to take this conversation further and to help get some of this stuff online. So know that if I can help at all or get involved, I'm definitely there. So
Cool. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thank you for all that you do. And I'm hoping that we can talk again sometime soon about some of the stuff that we've discussed here and take some of these ideas further.
Sounds great. I'm happy to do that, anytime. Let me know.
Cool, man. It was certainly great talking with you. Do you have any other questions or anything that you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, I'm satisfied. I enjoyed our talk. It's a good stopping place here.
I think so too. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe to mine and Bruce's channel. Thanks for joining us in the I Am David Long Friends and Fans Facebook group. Thanks so much for those Patreon supporters. If you would like to support me on Patreon, I would certainly appreciate that. And peace.
Peace.